Yes, hello everyone. My name is Ben Katoka, and currently I serve in the Division of African Studies at Hankook University of Foreign Studies. First of all, I would like to thank the Institute for Euro-African Studies for this great opportunity to have this seminar today. And the title of my presentation is Politics and Economic Development in the Democratic Republic of Congo since the mid-1990s. So basically, the presentation will be about an overview of the political and economic development in the DRC since the 1990s, with some references to the situation before the 1990s, that is, since independence. So very briefly, I have divided my presentation into 5 parts. But the last one, since this presentation is recorded, will not be able to cover it, but I expect to receive some of your questions through the Institute for Euro-African Studies. So the first part of my presentation will be about the country profile. I will briefly introduce the DRC, and then I will move on to briefly discuss the political context in the DRC, and then third, I will talk about the economic performance in the DRC since the mid-1990s, and finally, I will talk about the financial flows, the international financial flows, especially development assistance that is provided to the DRC. So Congo is a former Belgian colony, and it gained independence from Belgium in June 1960. And currently, Congo is the largest country in sub-Saharan Africa in terms of the land size. And according to some of the most recent United Nations population projections, Congo is predicted to become one of the 10 largest countries in the world in terms of the population size. So this gives you an idea of how large the country will be by the end of this century. And another important point to note about the DRC is that the country has been experiencing resurgence of violence since the 1990s, especially after the Rwandan genocide. This is a very important point to note because the genocide in Rwanda had a very significant impact on the internal politics of the DRC, and we'll talk about this later. And currently, according to some United Nations report, there are more than 100 armed groups that are operating in the DRC. And another important point to note about the DRC is that the country is home to the largest United Nations peacekeeping force with more than 15,000 soldiers. That is counterintuitive in the sense that the country remains unstable in spite of the presence of the UN's largest peacekeeping force. So it is difficult to understand why the country remains unstable while there are so many United Nations soldiers who are based in the country. And I would like to talk about this map that shows you the concentration of violence in the country. And you can see that most of the violent events take place mostly in the eastern part of the country that is bordered by three other African countries, Rwanda, Uganda, and Burundi. And Rwanda, Uganda, and Burundi are three African countries that, in a way or another, have contributed to the current instability in the DRC, because many of the armed groups that are operating in the DRC are directly or indirectly supported by these other African states. So we have this concentration of battlefields and violence in the eastern part of the DRC that is also the country's richest region in terms of minerals and other natural resources. So we can establish a relationship between violence in the DRC and the existence of violence, of minerals in this part of the country. So the armed groups that are operating in the DRC are not only serving the interest of the three other African countries that I mentioned, but they are also serving, according to many studies, some interest from other external actors like multinational companies interested in extracting minerals from this region. And in terms of the political situation, Congo has had 5 presidents since independence in 1960. And since independence, the country has had 3 cycles of presidential elections. The first one took place in 2006, and then in 2011, and the last one took place in 2018. And since the early 1990s, the country has experienced two of the most violent wars in Africa. And the first one took place between 1996 and 1997. And the second one took place between 1998 and 2002. So the second war in Congo ended officially in 2002. And one important point about this war in Congo is that it involved many external actors, including national armies from other African countries, such as Angola, Zimbabwe, Namibia on the one hand, and Rwanda, Uganda, and Burundi on the other. So the Second Congo War is often referred to as the Africa's World War, because of the involvement of more than 6 African countries in that conflict. So as I said, the current situation in the DRC is, in a way or another, a result of the Rwandan genocide. Because looking at data from some international organizations that make data on international conflict available, we can observe that before 1994, Congo was relatively stable with no major violence. And it is after the Rwandan genocide, in which more than 1 million Rwandan Hutu fled to Congo, that the country has been witnessing cycles of violence. Unfortunately, due to time limitation, I am not able to go into much details, but I will make this PPT available so that those who are interested in this topic can have a look. And as I said, the Second Congo War started in 1998 and ended in 2002 officially. And this war led to the assassination of President Laurent Kabila, who then was replaced by his son, Joseph Kabila, who has been the president of the DRC between 2001 and January 2019. So it is after the third presidential election that took place in December 2018 that President Joseph Kabila was replaced by the current president, President Tshisekedi. So I will then move on to the economic performance of the DRC since the mid-1990s, with some references to the period before. And as you can see here, the graph shows you the trend in GDP per capita, that is the solid black line at the top, and the trend in GDP growth, that is the green line at the bottom, and the trend in inflation, that is the red line in the middle. And what is interesting about these economic indicators is that you can observe that the period between the mid-1980s and the mid-1990s has been one of the worst for the DRC in terms of economic performance, with hyperinflation, that is inflation reaching levels above 2,000% in the 1990s, and negative economic growth in the 1990s, as you can see here, and decline in GDP per capita. So seeing, for example, the beginning and end years in this graph, you can see that the level of GDP per capita of the DRC in 1960 was higher compared to the level of GDP per capita in 2020. So this shows you how the economic situation in the country has worsened over time. Another important point about that I would like to mention is the flows of development assistance and foreign direct investment. And what is interesting about this graph is that Congo has been receiving almost $0 in terms of ODA and FDI. So it is only after the war officially ended in 2002 that donors have started to provide development assistance to the government of the DRC. So we can say that the end of the war had a positive effect on aid giving in the DRC, and more importantly, that private investors, especially foreign investors, have been investing in the DRC. So to cut a long story short, I can say that the end of the war has had a positive effect on the relationship between the DRC and external private and public actors. And in terms of the foreign direct investment, this graph shows you the trend. I think that the graph is more clear because it shows you the trend in the country's inflows of FDI since the early 1970s. And as I said, before the end of the war, the country did not receive much of foreign investment, and the end of the conflict had a dramatic effect on the flows of foreign direct investment. So I would like to also talk about the United Nations mapping report that was published a couple of years ago. And this report documents more than 600 incidents of violations of international human rights. And many actors in Africa, especially in the Great Lakes region, and in some of the countries that I mentioned, such as Rwanda and Uganda, are cited as the key actors in this human rights violation. And as I said earlier also, according to the mapping report of the United Nations, there are more than 100 armed groups that are operating in the country. So next, that is where I would like to briefly talk about how international financial assistance, how international financial assistance is important for the DRC. What you can see here basically is the different types of development resources that are available to any country, including the DRC. So just very briefly, there are two types of resources. So we have domestic and international resources. So domestic resources include, for example, public resources like taxes, tax revenue, and commercial domestic commercial resources, which include commercial loans from financial institutions like banks. And then international financial flows include official financial flows like ODA from donors, and then international private or commercial flows, which include foreign direct investment and others like remittances and others. So why is it important to understand this? It is important because in a country with well-functioning institutions and a strong enough capacity to collect taxes, the domestic public resources are supposed to be the most important source for financing development projects in a country. However, in the context of a country like the DRC, where the capacity to mobilize taxes is very weak, international, official, and commercial flows are the most important that can support development in the country. But looking at this graph here, which shows you the relationship between poverty and the size of tax performance, well, basically there is a typo here. It is not tax performance, it is ODA, because when I was making this graph, I probably omitted changing the title. So the graph, well, perhaps I'm not Yeah, well, I think that, yeah, the graph is, I'm sorry. So the graph is basically about the poverty rate and tax performance. So that is the size of tax revenue in terms of GDP in a country. So what this graph shows you is how these two indicators are related. And in the case of the DRC, we observe that poverty rate is almost 60%. So that is based on the average between 2010 and 2016. And the average poverty rate in the DRC is close to 60%. And at the same time, we see that the capacity to mobilize taxes represent levels below 10%. So this means that the fact that Congo mobilizes less domestic resources is related to its high level of poverty. So we have some other countries in red, in black, and the black color represent the sub-Saharan African countries. And as you can observe, most of the sub-Saharan African countries are have a quite high level of poverty. And finally, I would like to talk about some socioeconomic indicators. And here, what we have is the adolescent fertility rate and mortality rate in the infant mortality rate, that is the number of under 5 children per 1,000 live birth. And the green bar shows you the maternal mortality rate. So here I compare these social indicators between Congo and South Korea. Well, as you can see, in terms of the maternal mortality rate, for example, you can say that more than 800 women die. I mean, more than 800 women out of 100,000 die while giving birth. Right, and in comparison, you can see that in South Korea, it's close to 0. And the reason for this is the very poor healthcare system in the DRC. And in terms of adolescent fertility rate, also Congo has one of the poorest performance in the region. And in comparison with South Korea, you can also see how the country performs. So the basic idea of this presentation was to give just a brief overview of the political and economic situation in the DRC. And unfortunately, due to time limitation, I only had 20 minutes to cover all of these topics. But I'm open to answer any of your questions. And if you are interested in asking any questions related to this topic, feel free to send your questions through the Institute for Euro-African Studies. So I thank you very much, and I hope to have this discussion in person soon. Thanks again to the Institute for Euro-African Studies, and all the best, everyone. Thank you.